he hit the guy on the bike. I believe the guy survived, so you don't have to feel bad. But that at that time he was like, oh my gosh, like I gotta figure out how to not be hitting all these cyclists on the way home from my theater job. My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? I believe this is episode 55. We're going to be talking about windshield wipers and windshields, and we're going to learn a lot of stuff about that stuff. But before we get into that, got to do a little housekeeping. Even before that, I just want to say thank you for everybody that's listened to anytime throughout this whole year. I appreciate you guys. We'll be coming up on our 1 year anniversary, I believe in like 2 weeks. It's come a long way to listen from the first episode I did about dollar stores to this one now, and even to have a mini-sode accompaniment and the other podcasts I have kind of coming down the pipeline. I definitely have more stuff in the works, but I just want to say thank you guys for press and play. But what am I watching right now? I just finished that show called Sort of on HBO Max, and it is really interesting. It's I watched both seasons actually in one day. They're really short episodes, but it's about a gender like non-binary Pakistani person who lives in Toronto, and it follows their life as a nanny. To this family, who's the wife of that family, she goes into a coma, and then the nanny kind of takes over. We're not over, but it's like this whole just a lot of different dynamics. But it's very good. It's a comedy. I wouldn't quite call it a dark comedy, but it's definitely, there's some dark aspects to it. But I would definitely highly recommend it. I also just finished watching caught up to South Side, this season 3. I'm about halfway through, which is I think all the episodes they have out right now. It's another good comedy. This one takes place at a furniture rental place in Southside Chicago. It was originally on Comedy Central, got canceled. HBO picked it up, which allows them to do a lot more. They're a little more scandalous in what they say now, which is fine. But I'm just saying that it's definitely different on a different network. And then what am I listening to? Right now, I always do not always, but a lot of times I do the We Might Be Drunk podcast with Sam Morrell and Mark Norman. I listen to that all the time. I like those two comedians. They're probably two of the greatest comedians out right now. Definitely, both their specials are really funny, and I like their point of view. The main point of that podcast is they'll interview other comedians and usually make a cocktail. They'll have a bartender on site, so they kind of make cool cocktails and stuff while they're talking. But that's just because those guys are interesting to hear what they have to say. And then I have the Daily Stoic with Ryan Holiday. I listened to that. Been listening to that for probably a couple years now, I guess. And they're really short episodes, and I don't always understand them because this guy's pretty deep. But he always has a really interesting way of explaining life that I feel like is worth listening to if you're ever in a box. I feel like you can't get out of it. Like he always, when I listen to it, I'm like, he's an outside the box thinker. He really is. Since I'm plugging those episodes, I'll plug my own mini-sode that comes out every Thursday at 4:30 a.m. Bite-sized bios. It is our most recent episode was about Hillary Clinton, and I tell you all about her life, and I also tell you why that pantsuit meant so much to her. We dig right into it. We find out why that became a staple in her wardrobe. But before we get on to the next episode, as always, like and subscribe. If you like what you hear here on HDTH, be sure to give us a like and subscribe, maybe even 5 stars if you feel so inclined. Or as I always say, you want to give us 2 stars and then say why you didn't want to give us 5. That's all right too. Any constructive criticism is always accepted. But yeah, so I think we're going to go ahead and get on to this episode. Only one more week left in the year, and then we'll be on to the brand new year podcasting, a whole nother year finding out how things happen. But without further ado, as I'm known to do, here's the episode. So today we are going to talk about windshield wipers and everything, or at least most things that surround them. I started this idea with it just being, truthfully, just wanted to see where it would go because I didn't think it would be a whole episode. I thought that because I've had it in the list for a while and I kept looking at it and I was like, let's do it because I thought I knew the story of windshield wipers, and I don't. But I probably knew 30%. I'm gonna give you guys the extra 70% that I picked up. But you'll find before we get into it, there's a lot of different different terminology that I feel like gets just thrown around and used differently as far as like who made the first electric windshield wiper or automatic or different types of products they use. Were they rollers? Were they blades? And I'm gonna try to keep a pretty linear line. But I just want to say, for any of these people out here, maybe, just who maybe may get confused or think, oh, he doesn't. That's not actually what, it doesn't go that way. Agreed. Because I've read a lot of this stuff and I've gone through the edits for myself, and I'm just like, man, But it is interesting. So, one of the first earliest recorded patents for what they called a windscreen wiper was done by a man named George J. Capewell of Hartford, Connecticut. And this was filed actually on August 6th of 1896. And his invention was for an automated motorized wiper for cars, locomotives, and other type of land vehicles at the time. And that didn't go that far because I'm not even sure if I know the answer why, but basically, I think honestly because during that time the cars weren't as ubiquitous as they would become. The Model T wouldn't roll out for another 15 years after he patented this. So I just think he was a little bit before his time. Other things before the windshield wiper, a lot of drivers of vehicles would manually clean their windshield. And we'll see that actually even with some of the first windshield wipers themselves, but they would have to, get out and just wipe it down, with whatever they had, a rag or something. But they would have to pull over, sometimes it would be so bad. And we're talking about, bad weather conditions. And so enter Mary Anderson. She is basically the godmother, right, of windshield wipers. And when you read a lot of these articles that talk about interesting facts about, windshield wipers, they always throw in there that they were made by a woman. I don't know why that blows people away so much, or why that's such a, gotta get that out there first. But so she did. She basically did. So she was born in 1866. In Birmingham, Alabama, and she worked there as a real estate developer, cattle rancher, and a winemaker, all throughout different points of her life. But in the year 1902, she made a trip to New York City, good old NYC. And let's see, we have a quote here from some of her family that was saying that she was riding in a streetcar, and it was snowing, and basically that's what kind of led her to want to create this invention. She, quote unquote, she observed that the streetcar driver had to get out and continually clean off the windshield. And this is a problem for everybody, not just for her, but because it would literally, if you're in inclement weather, it's one thing to have to like drive through it with windshield wipers, but if you have to stop every 5 minutes to wipe off your windshield, you're not going anywhere very fast. So it was also an inconvenience just overall. And as I said, naturally that caused delays, and that got her wondering, what if there were some sort of blade that could wipe off the windshield without making this guy get out every 5 seconds to do so. So when she got back to Alabama, she hired a designer for a hand-operated device. Like I said, the early windshield wipers were actually still hand-operated, but you didn't have to stop, you didn't have to pull over. That's progress, right? And so she hired a designer for a hand-operated device to keep the windshield clear. And she had a local company produce a working model. She applied for and received a patent in 1903 that would last for 17 years. Now, what we'll see and there's another woman that comes up after this who also added some advancements to windshield wipers. Neither one of these ladies would actually make any real money off of what they did. But they were basically the precursors and like the driving forces behind what would become the modern windshield wiper. And so the actual patent describes, how it would work, and it says that the wiper was to be operated by a handle inside the vestibule of the motor car and be easily removable, thus leaving nothing to mar the usual appearance of the car during fair weather. Meaning, basically, if you're out there on a sunny day, you don't even see your windshield wipers. So then we see, like I said, we're going to move from her on to the next woman because there weren't as many cars even when she made this. When Mary Anderson first made this patent. There's still the Model T was still 7 years away, or at least 5 years away, I believe. No, 7 years away from when it, so you're making stuff for things people don't even have yet. And as we've covered, I believe, in the 5-day work week a long time ago, like the Model T and even Henry Ford and his entire just business model is what basically laid the groundwork for the 5-day work week and the idea of leisure time to be spent in your vehicles doing things, which would then make a need for these windshield wipers. It's a whole thing. Like, you have to have so many parts before these things can become successful. So the next person to add some things to the windshield wiper was a woman by the name of Charlotte Bridgewood. I've heard Bridgewood also as well. It might have been this. I could be looking at an Americanized spelling because I saw other things where they spell it like the wood part VUHD. Like, her name is Charlotte Bridgewood. But she received a patent in 1917 for what she would title the Electric Storm Windshield Cleaner. And she did this through a manufacturing company, and she created them, and they worked, but they weren't. I think it was still just a matter of the time, because basically the patent was issued in 1917, which was just around the time that Mary Anderson's was about to end, but then it would expire 3 years later. And I think there were a number of things that also probably played into them not being successful. They were not actually blades as we know them. They were rollers of some sort, which just doesn't sound like it would work. And then, so like I said, also the patent would just end in 1920, and literally I think less than a year and a half, maybe 2 years later, Cadillac would make them standard, would make wipers standard on their vehicles, but she couldn't make any money off that because she didn't own that technology anymore. So it's just, you see these two ladies kind of just getting the short end of the stick when it comes to any sort of recognition for their actual, inventions. But what I was really wondering about, what I was trying to figure out, and the reason why I couldn't make this an episode yet, because I knew that information, and you kind of know the stuff at the end. We know what wiper blades look like now, but I was trying to figure out how they became just the modern wiper blade that we have, right? And so I went looking for, I don't know if people are how many may even be aware of the type of wiper blades that they have, but I've always heard of the company Trico when it comes to windshield wipers blades, and so I wanted to know what's up with that company, and how did it become that I even know that company name and I know nothing about cars. Like I know cars, I know cars when I see them, but I'm not the guy that goes under the hood, which is very sad because my father was a helicopter mechanic, and I just, for some reason, the bug didn't bite me. But we're moving on. But I digress. So we get back to Trico and the modern wiper blade. So right around the time as Miss Bridgewood was patenting her invention, there was a man named John R. Oishii. It's cool. It's a fun name. Oishii. Just say it one time. Oishii. He created the Tri-Continental Corporation, which is Trico. He did this in 1917, and before he did that, he was a theater manager. But basically, when he was a theater manager, he ran over this guy who was on a bike in inclement weather. I think it was snowing. It snows a lot in Buffalo, and so he couldn't see anything. And he hit the guy on the bike. I believe the guy survived. So you don't have to feel bad. But at that time, he was like, "Oh my gosh! I gotta figure out how to not be hitting all these cyclists on the way home from my theater job." Right. So cue a man named John W. Jepson, who was a retired electrical engineer, and he had actually already created hand-operated squeegees, right, which were for cleaning automobile windshields. And so you get Oishii, who gets with Jepson, and they're like, "Man, we can do windshield wipers." And the first windshield wiper they make was called Rain Rubber, which is actually a pretty cool name. But yeah, so that the first actual Trico windshield wiper was called Rain Rubber, and it was marketed, I believe, in 1923. Let me see if I can find that. No, I'm sorry, 1917. Yeah, so it was actually marketed, the first one, in 1917. And this is where we actually start to see, this is was important to me to kind of bridge the gap, was when did they go from these ladies who kept trying to make windshield wipers and not making any money, when did it go from that to, oh, they're everywhere, and it's a real part of a car, and it's not only is it a part of a car, but it's a money making, profitable part of a car. And so this is how we do that. Trico is how we get to that point. And so the Rain Rubber, which was marketed, like I said, first in 1917, and it consisted of a rubber blade that was attached to a handle, and it would be carried in the automobile's toolbox during good weather, and the handle of the Rain Rubber fit through the opening between the upper and lower sections of the two-part windshields during the day of that time. So what you're thinking, if you're thinking about a normal windshield, you have to think of something different. Look back to those older cars. They were actually two-paneled windshields. So these were designed to stick straight through, I guess it was a little slit if you could, and just slip it through there, and then you could work it, by pushing the handle back and forth. The driver could clear the rain from the windshield. So that was really the first modern windshield wiper that was actually for sale. You buy it for your car. Cars exist already. Like I said, we're now almost 10 years past when the Model T becomes a thing. And we'll see, like I said, in the early 20s, Cadillac actually makes them standard on their vehicles as well. So windshield wipers they're showing up everywhere. And so I have a small timeline here of Trico windshield wiper accomplishments or inventions, however you want to put it. I'm only going to go through a couple because there actually are a couple more advancements I want to cover with windshield wipers that go back a little bit, or actually right around where we are right now, right around the 1920s. Because there's a few people that were coming in and adding different things to create what we have now. To go from what you put, the first one being something you shove through a dual paneled windshield and kind of work with your hands, to becoming, actually the windshield wipers that you have on your car today. We're not going to get all the way to, I really stop around the 60s, I think, in the 50s, because after that, it's just technology kind of growing on itself. It's not as these big, large advancements that we're finding about 100 years ago when we had cars. I mean, we're going to find out later. I guess I'll spoil out that the first cars, the windshields were optional. You get it, you don't, you pull it down when you don't want it. Like, so it's just like we really have progressed, and I just wanted to kind of cover that portion. But before we do, we'll say in 1936 is really, we see the windshield washer system. And so Trico is kind of the people who are behind the idea of, kind of cleaning your windshields. You pull that little button, it squirts on your windshield, as they call it, 2 little squirts. And that they pioneered the idea of using windshield washer fluid to keep windshields clean, and doing that with the windshield wipers. Now, I've always thought about who came up with that idea, because it works perfectly. You know what I mean? Not perfect, but it's like, you can really do it. Like, you can clean your windshield while you're driving. It's not a problem. It's like, who made that? I don't know who made it, but as far as the person, but Trico is the company who marketed it for the first time. They have a couple others that I thought were interesting. They have one that was made, I think, a few years before that. It's called the Sleet Wand, right? And it was made to kind of like de-ice your windshield, and they did it with it was like a rock salt type of product that would also be in your windshield wiper, so that like you would have like basically the same stuff you would put on a front porch to kind of take the snow away. They had that on a windshield wiper. I don't think they do that anymore, but they have all these types of like ice and harsh winter wiper blades, and those were basically some kind of like the predecessors, if you will, like the first ones, their first attempts. Yeah, I think that's probably about it for as far as that timeline. I will go back, like I said, to let's see, what do we got here, because there's the idea of the intermittent windshield wipers. There's a lot of different types they go through to get up to that point. There was a man named Raymond Anderson who, in 1923, he applied for some patents about some windshield wipers, and there were a couple things that came from that. I think he was the first person to kind of create the idea of the intermittent windshield wiper. And this is, if you don't know what I'm saying, it's really what we have now, where it's like when they go in unison, as opposed to, or not in unison, but like they kind of take each other's spot when they move. Whereas the other ones would move together, and they wouldn't. You'd only get, if you look at those old movies, you can see it. They only get a certain swath of the actual windshields because they're not moving intermittently like they do now. So that he was the first one to kind of create that idea. He's not the guy that really pioneered it, because that would come actually, I think, about 30 years later with a man named John Kearns, I believe it is. But he's the first guy to kind of patent it, and he also, in his patent, had the first use of an electric motor. And like, this is where we get into the whole idea of like, what is, I don't know, because it confused me. So I can assume that other people would also be confused as well. My listeners are probably smarter than me. That's probably very true. So you have like the electric motor, right? And then you have like the automatic motor, and then you have what they call a vacuum powered motor. And I'm just like, all right, too much. So, but Raymond Anderson was the first guy to make the electric motor. And I guess before that they were using vacuum powered, and a lot of different. It is interesting to point out, when I was doing the research, when they first get into the idea of automatic windshield wipers, they are some of the ones that they use they use the steam from the engine to power it. So they're almost steam powered windshield wipers, and that actually was sustainable for a while. I don't know that I don't have the actual notes in front of me of how long that was a viable product, but that was some of the first early on automatic windshield wipers would be plugged up through like the not the exhaust system, but whatever they could pull off from the steam from the front part of the engine, and that would actually power the windshield wipers to go back and forth. But see, what was Raymond Anderson's idea? His actually was the motor was powered by the car's battery, and it would be connected to the battery through wiring. The advantage was that the wiper unit was actually smaller and lighter, and especially compared to the full bearers, which I don't think I've actually mentioned them yet. Those guys were also, I didn't mention them that much because they created their stuff, and honestly just directly sold it to Trico. Like they made automatic windshield wipers as well, but they basically sold their technology to Trico like right after they made it. They're two brothers from Ohio, from Cleveland. Let's get them out there since we're talking about them. But yeah, they made that. And then, yeah, I was just like, for that, which is like, I'm sure they made money, but it's just not as interesting as these other guys who are trying to like make it on their own. Like, and I get it. You know what I mean? It's what all people do right now with all these software companies and all that stuff. But I don't know if we think we've covered Raymond Anderson enough. But yeah, but with the full bears, basically, they had a little box that would be like on the inside of the window that was actually powering the windshield wipers. And I guess theirs was a lot larger. And it actually, I believe I'm getting this right. It powered both of them. One box powered both of them, whereas the one for Raymond Anderson, it had one for each on each side of the windows, which I guess which just made it easier for vision. I'm not sure. That's what I've seen. All right, so we've got one more guy to talk about before we get out of here to the next segment. In the next segment, we're going to be learning a lot of stuff about windshields. I kind of saved that for the things I didn't know before, just to kind of keep it a little bit more separate. But yeah, so this guy's name is Robert Kearns. I think I called him John earlier. Sorry, Robert. Sorry, John. Robert. Sorry, Robert. Called you John. In 1964, Mr. Kearns, we'll go with that, was living in Detroit, Michigan, and he applied for a patent for a windshield wiper system with intermittent operation, which is essentially what Raymond Anderson applied for and got 40 years ago. But this guy made some advancements, and we will talk about them right now. So the biggest thing, I think, from the change in that 40 years is that basically when Anderson created his intermittent wipers, they had to be manually operated, right? It was the driver's job to regulate the interval between wipes and to switch the system on and off. So you kind of had to know what you needed without and still do it yourself, like hit the box at the top of the window or whatever. And so with Kearns' invention, the driver still had to switch the wipers on, but the system, I think this is really cool. The system was able to regulate intervals all by itself. It could also turn itself off. And these were called responsive wipers. They had electronic sensors in the wiper motor that measured the amount of drag that was encountered by the wiper blades that were moving across the windshield. So basically, less drag equals wet, more drag equals dry. So when drag got less, the system would shorten the intervals. Then when drag got worse, the system would actually lengthen the intervals and eventually shut down. I thought that was pretty cool. I'm not even sure if we still use that technology. But when I read that, I was just like, that is an advancement. That's worth mentioning. And that is how windshield wipers happened. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're going to round it up. Mary Anderson makes the first windshield wipers in 1902 after a trip to NYC. Charlotte Bridgewood furthers the design in 1917 with electric rollers. Trico begins that same year and would go on to become the world's leader in wiper blades. Things I didn't know before. And now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? All right, and so for this week's Things I Didn't Know Before, I thought, because I was about done with the windshield wipers research, and then I thought, well, like what I want to keep expanding with this podcast, we have to if we're talking about windshield wipers, we have to talk about windshields. You know what I mean? At least a little bit. And so I thought I would actually, because I didn't know anything about them. I know nothing about them. And I was actually reading an article about windshields earlier this week, and that's what made me think about it. Because I thought about, is there stuff that I do or don't know about it? And I was like, oh, you just learned something like 2 days ago that had nothing to do with, I wasn't doing research. I was just bored, and I was just reading stuff, and you know how you do that. But so the first thing I'll tell you about windshields is that, like I said, I think actually a little bit earlier, is that windshields used to be optional. So when the first automobiles first came out in the early 1900s, the windshields were not standard. It's not something you can just guarantee was going to be there. They were an add-on item. They were a luxury. You know, how much money do you got? You got windshield money? Let's see what, kind of dollars you're working with. And so it consisted of a thin sheet of glass that could be folded down when it got dirty. And like I said, they were a luxury item. Windshields increased the cost of a vehicle. And so only if you were really about that cheddar would you actually have a windshield on your car. They didn't actually become a standard feature in many cars until around 1915. So that would also, like I was saying earlier, would have something to do with why the first early pioneers of windshield wipers, which were two women, had trouble marketing their product because most people weren't even using windshields. They weren't even using the thing that they were trying to sell them to keep clear. You know what I mean? It's because I think you can look at these and wonder, was it bad business deals? Was it a bad product? It's like, no, it's just a product of the time. Like nobody had windshields. They don't have to wipe them. It's pretty simple. This I thought was actually interesting. Shatterproof glass was invented by accident. So we have our French chemist here named Edouard Benedictus, right? And he inadvertently invented shatterproof glass when he dropped a glass flask that was coated in cellulose nitrate. When he dropped it, it didn't shatter. He was like, "Oh my gosh, shatterproof glass!" But he wouldn't actually like patent this, he wouldn't actually his technology wouldn't actually be used for automobiles in any way, shape, or form until around 1909. I'm not actually sure. I didn't get the year that he found it. That would be a much more interesting fact of what I just said if I had the first little bit. Let's see. This next part, I got two more pieces for you, and then we will actually just be on out of here. Thank you guys for always pressing play, definitely. So what we have here is airbags depend on windshields, and I'm not a science guy, right? I'm not a physics guy, so I've never had these thoughts. But when I read this article, I was like, that makes so much sense. So if you haven't already gotten to it, I will try to explain it to you now. So in many cases, auto airbags actually use the windshield to deploy properly. The glass assists to position the airbag upon impact. So what that means is if the glass was to shatter, right, then the airbag wouldn't open up in the perfect kind of pillow way to kind of try to save your life. It would probably either get cut by the shatterproof or it would get cut by the glass or go out the window or either way it wouldn't be the safe kind of little wound they're trying to make for you in that accident. And that's another reason that shatterproof glass is so important, is because it doesn't shatter, so now the airbag can actually take its correct form. I never thought about that. I've also never been in a car accident, so I just there's a lot of things in my life that I haven't thought about. Finding that out as I go along. The last thing that I will tell you, and this is something that I used to wonder about as a child, but I hadn't really thought about it in years because I just one of those things you figure you're never going to figure out. You know what I mean? I used to look at these, and these are the little black dots on car windows and windshields. I'm about to tell you why they're here. And it's interesting, but you would just be like, I don't know why. So in the 50s and 60s, car manufacturers started to apply an adhesive to hold car windows in place instead of metal trim. It's like we mentioned, the windshield itself goes through a long transition of being some sort of thin little glass you can roll down to actually being it was encased in metal. Now it's going to be actually adhered to the actual vehicle. But when they did this, their end job wasn't aesthetically pleasing. It just didn't look good. I don't wonder what it looked like. They say it didn't look good. So enter the black rims you see around your car windows today. They're called frits. That's the black part that encases your car window. And so the dots that border them, I think they're also called frits. Yeah, and they're made from the ceramic paint, and the frits hide the icky-looking but important adhesive from view. And so also the painted rims, they're actually baked into the window. They're actually baked into the window, which makes so much sense because, I'm telling you, as a kid, I haven't done this as an adult. Literally, probably not in my adult life. But as a kid, when you're really bored on road trips, I would just look at those little black dots and just be like, "What is going on?" Literally, I'm not making this up. I couldn't figure it out. But basically, they hold the glue in place, right, which holds the windshield in place. So it's like really one of the more important parts of your car when you look at it. And as for specifically for the dots themselves, they did that. You know how it kind of goes up and kind of disappears into the window? They did that to make an aesthetically pleasing transition from the thick black line that is the frits to the transparency of the window. And the dots are not randomly placed. It's not just no coincidences. They are positioned in what's called the half-tone pattern, getting smaller and farther apart as they recede into the transparency. So when you're looking at it next time, a few things to throw at you. I don't know, I threw a lot at you about those black dots right there. So basically, they come in a half-tone pattern, and they are baked in, and that black stuff is just to cover the adhesive, which is supposedly super ugly, to keep your window in place. Oh, and the dots also help to do with temperature control. So this is just a lot, very well thought out. They say the dots distribute the heat more evenly when the heat hits the window, which prevents the windshield from warping in the heat. Just learning a lot here. All right, that's been another episode of How Did That Happen? Learned a lot about windshield wipers. I mean, just those black dots alone blew my mind. I'll be taking that home with me for sure. As always, if you like what you just heard, there's more where that came from over at hdthappen.com. There you will find a written version of what you just heard, as well as photos and videos that help me create the website. I always put the works cited up there to show you guys where I get the answers that I find and try to figure out how things happened. You can also find me on Twitter at htthappen.com. Like and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast. It really helps the pod grow. I've been seeing some people have been rating us, like I said, over at Good Pods. That's really great. Anywhere you guys are listening, man, if you want to just give us any sort of like criticism or just show that you listen to it, that'd be great as well. If you want to give us 5 stars, that's awesome. But as always, if you want to give us 2 stars and tell us why you didn't want to give us 5, I love that as well. As always, thank you guys for pressing play. It's pretty wild that this is going to be one of the last episodes of the year. You know, we've done a whole year of how did that happen. It started January of this year. I don't know if I thought this podcast would be where it is, but we're definitely, this is the most listens we've had in this whole year. December has been the highest rated month, so definitely growth is there. And in the coming year, we just want to keep adding things. You know, I mean, maybe we'll eventually monetize this. Maybe we'll put out some merch. Maybe we'll go with the video. I don't know. I just want to keep, every one of these, I want to just keep kind of reaching for the stars and trying to just make it better every time. But that's it. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you guys in a couple days with the new bite-sized bios.